Hey, all you avid listeners out there, this is Dr. John. And if you enjoy what you're hearing on these joint podcasts with me and my fiancee, Jory Rose, please know that we are offering a week-long retreat in Costa Rica in April of 2023 at one of the top resorts in the country where the body workers are next level, and you will learn from myself and Jory how to be in better relationship to yourself, to your loved one, and to everyone else. This is going to be a once-in-a-lifetime experience. Please feel free to check out the podcast notes for more links, details, and info. Thanks so much. And now on with the show. Hey, everybody. This is Dr. John back with another episode of The Evolved Caveman. And I am thrilled to have with me here today, Henry Edwards. And Henry's a new friend of mine whose mission is to accentuate human goodness and moral progress to promote greater well-being. For the past 30 plus years, he has taught a variety of subjects: history, English, social sciences, math, science, at all levels. In his teaching and writing, he promotes a realistic and optimistic view of the world based on broad trends supported by data. He has a book out recently, The Daily Better, 365 Reasons for Optimism, which we're going to get into today. And he is currently working on his next book, Positive Psychology for Teens. And this is one of the things that drew me to him. He's on the faculty and he is a graduate, I believe, right, Henry, of the MAP program, the MAP program. So the MAP program is, to me, a very famous program. It was the first positive psychology program in the world. So it stands for Masters of Applied Positive Psychology. He is also the Wellbeing Director at the New School of Northern Virginia. Henry, thanks so much for being here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, John. Super happy to be here and great getting to know you.
Yeah, and our first conversation before this was a blast. Like, I really enjoyed it. I find those conversations so restorative.
Absolutely. Yeah, a lot of common themes. And I love that there's, excuse me, I'm just going to clear my throat here. Mm-hmm. So much, a lot of what we were talking about is having to do with men and being a man and some of the challenges of that, which I think is great. And one of the most treatment resistant groups, and this as a clinician, are men. So it's just great to talk about kind of challenges men have, and optimism and positive psychology are great things to bring to all that.
Yeah, and I want to get into that in a little bit, but first I want to hear about your story. So how did you get involved in positive psychology? Why does it matter? Why should I give a shit about positive psychology, Henry?
Right. Well, for me, it was pain. And, pain is often the touchstone of growth. So growing up, I was not a happy kid, like a lot of kids, I think. But my specific brand of it was, I think I was a depressed kid. And also there was alcoholism. And you and I were talking about marriage and how challenging that is. And my folks, I think, did the best they could, but ultimately, they split, which happens to 40-50% of marriages, of course. So it's a pretty common thing. But I think my own alcoholism kind of grew out of all that in my teens, and I was a pretty depressed kid. So I mean, that depression, came through, and also I still have to deal with that. Although I have a lot of tools now, and I feel like I'm in a really good place with that. So going into just doing a lot of alcohol, drugs, high school, college, got through college miraculously and started teaching. And right as I got out of college, my dad he had a cancer diagnosis. A lot of it had to do with his lifestyle, which was he was a smoker and an alcoholic. And when he was 59 and I was 24, he died. And so thank you. All of the pain kind of came up. And so I did something a lot of people do, which is I got some therapy, which really, really was helpful. Another thing that happened. So
let me pause you there. So
yeah,
I'm
sure.
a little bit confused. You're a man.
Yep.
And you got therapy?
I know. Can you believe it? Miracle.
So you're kind of a unicorn.
Kind of a unicorn. Yeah, I prefer narwhal. I'm a rainbow narwhal.
Makes me think of Elf.
Yes. Hope you find your dad.
Exactly.
Dads,
very
right?
good.
Yeah, knew that reference. So anyways, did some therapy. I think a turning point and this is a big part of my story, was I took a 500-mile walk on the Appalachian Trail, and
Wow.
something in positive psychology is this idea of agency and efficacy, that you can do something. And I really think that it was terrible losing my dad when I was pretty young, but one thing it did, one lesson I got out of it, and this is something else in positive psychology, is benefit finding. And one benefit was that, I really realized that this was it. This was not a dress rehearsal. And so I started taking risks. And of course, I think part of any kind of growth is risk taking. And so I after that trip, I felt a lot more like I had some control over my life, that I had some fun. And then I think I had kind of enough kind of ego strength to then get sober. And I got sober when I was 27, and I've been sober, most of my life now. I've been sober 28 years. Yeah. So, I think, so what does this have to do with positive psychology? So when I'm getting sober, my mentor is telling me, you have to have an attitude of gratitude. And at first I'm like, for what? Right.
Did you go through those 3 stages of like that criticism or feedback, where the first stage is like, fuck you, and the second stage is like, I suck, and the third stage is like, wait, what? Attitude of gratitude.
Yeah, no, I go through that all the time.
Yeah, I love that, because it's like anger externalized, anger internalized, and then wait a second, maybe he has something.
And actually, I'm sure you'll agree with this, making that loop faster, right?
Yes.
Getting to the point where it's like
seconds.
And again, it's very much a positive psychology thing, is to turn that into like, oh, someone's criticizing me. This is gold.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's a gift. Criticism is a gift, because I'm going to learn something important about myself. And actually, I love writing. I love writing, and that's a huge part of my well-being kind of profile. But I'm in a writer's group, to make my writing better. But I just hear criticism all the time, and it's great. I become more resilient, and getting into this mindset of like, criticism is a gift.
This is a little bit of a tangent, but
sure.
If you think of sensitivity to rejection on a spectrum, 1 to 10, 1 being I'm fine with rejection, 10 being it crushes me, where were you at the beginning of, well, maybe back even when you're in your 20s or teens? Yeah. How sensitive to rejection have you been throughout your lifespan? Because it sounds like with practice, you've gotten better and better at it. Because it made me think, the criticism, if it keeps coming at you, you get better at receiving it, and you get less sensitive to rejection.
Well, I think it's like habits, right? So if you make a habit of deflecting criticism, then you're going to, I think I had a shell. I was so, so I was a 9, I would say, right? I was a 9. Criticism really crushed me. Granted, I was very good at giving it, especially to my family and my parents.
I love that. Because I think, me too, when I was younger.
Right. And you were saying externalizing it, right? That's the problem, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's practice. But I do think you're a clinician. Doing it with people who are wise is so helpful, because, and if there's any theme, there's many themes actually, but a really important theme is getting help, getting help on an ongoing basis. That was something else I learned getting sober, is that, asking for help is strength. And
definitely,
my father was a silent generation guy, and I think he was worried about appearing, I think earlier generations, especially of men, were much more reputation management oriented. I got to look tough. I got to have my shit together. And now we know, what I think everybody's learning, hopefully, not everybody, but is that, vulnerability. I think of Brene Brown's work, weakness. How is someone going to help you if they think you're invulnerable and perfect and tough? So that's just so important.
Yeah. Well, and I love the study they did a while back, and I can't cite the authors, but where they had people go up on stage and share something vulnerable. And there was this huge gap between self-perception and other perception. So after you're on stage and I'm talking about my alcoholism or whatever it is, I get off stage and I'm like, oh my God, like, what did I just do? Like, that was so embarrassing. I don't even know why I shared that. And yet everyone in the audience is like, wow, that was so courageous. Like,
exactly.
And they feel somehow more bonded to that person.
Absolutely.
And so I try and keep that in mind too, that there's this big difference between watching someone else do it and what you feel and think versus doing it yourself, at least initially.
Yeah. And like so many things, you're trying to get that, the space, close the gap, right? It's that Theodore Frankl, between stimulus and response, there is a space, right? And in that space lies our freedom.
Mm-hmm.
So this, everything is practice, right? Anders Ericsson and other people, other psychologists. But if sooner I realize that vulnerability is going to lead to intimacy, and you don't lead with the chin. I mean, you don't just be vulnerable all the time, right? There's a time, but you just bring, like, if I'm vulnerable, that I'm going to have intimacy. Like, I don't know about you, but I thought intimacy was sex. That's what I thought until probably my 20s. That's right. John, I gotta talk to you. We're gonna meet afterward. There's this thing called intimacy that does not involve your penis.
Damn it.
No. But yeah, it's like, oh wow, this is intimacy. This is where, it's a back and forth, because I used to take hostages, right? It would be like I'd have a girlfriend and I'd tell her everything, and it was a dump. Right. It was not a relationship.
Like the phrase, I used to take hostages.
Right. Yeah. Now I have relationships. I used to be hostage situations. Right. And they had Stockholm syndrome. So she stuck with me longer than she should have. But yeah, but you have these intimacy, and now, and we talked about this earlier, I have this men's group that I've been in for 25 years, and everybody knows everything. And we all know that, like, oh, if I'm vulnerable, if I'm intimate, you're all going to love me more, right? As opposed to less, even though I know all your warts.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny, like there's the, I don't remember the name of the exercise, but there's a positive psychology exercise where you start off by sharing your biggest challenge and tell a story. And the story arc goes from your biggest challenge to overcoming that challenge.
Yes.
And it's so much more powerful. And I've done this in class, teaching class. It's so much more powerful than if I tell you, like, hi, Henry, I'm Dr. John Schinner, or I have a PhD from California, and I've written a book, and I've done this, and I've done that. And like, I believe that sort of introduction just drives a wedge between people.
Yep.
Because it's kind of like a resume. It's like, here's all my accomplishments. Whereas if I say, wow, I went through this really contentious divorce 10, 12 years ago, and this is how I overcame, my anger at my ex, it makes me much more human and relatable. It creates emotions that bond us.
Totally agree. And I think of the work of like Dan McAdams at Northwestern. Oh gosh, I want to say Tim Wilson. He's at UVA. But this idea of it's narrative identity, right? And so that the way I tell the story about myself shapes my identity. And even Bruner studied this stuff and wrote about this stuff. This idea that if one definition of mental illness is that your sense of self is fractured, and by telling these stories, you have more of an identity. And what Dan McAdams, what you're referring to, is this redemptive story arc, right? That you start, and I actually just had students of mine, high school students that I have in a positive psychology class. I had them do this a couple of weeks ago. Is take a challenge, something that was hard, and it wasn't you wouldn't have chosen it, but through it you learned something, or you were stronger afterward, right? And so they're learning that they're creating the narrative of their life.
That's the process of post-traumatic growth, right? Like,
absolutely.
What's the important piece? What importance did I learn from this tragedy, difficulty, challenge?
Right. It's cool too that the post-traumatic growth literature, I mean, that most people do that on their own, right? About I think roughly, and this is Rich Tedeschi and Calhoun and some others who on post-traumatic growth, but that about a third of people suffer PTSD. And by the way, I don't know if you see this as a clinician, but as an educator, the way people talk about, and I say kids, but I don't like saying that because to make it sound like they're worse than. But this is what I'm hearing in the classroom is that students are talking about that's traumatic, or that's a traumatic experience. And one reframe I was doing is like, well, you can go through a traumatic experience and be okay. And in fact, most people kind of, process it, right? About 2/3 process it. About a third may get PTSD. But actually the majority something like half or more than half have some kind of growth, right? Have some kind of growth. Now, I don't think my father dying when I was 24 is traumatic. I mean, that happens all the time. It's tough, right? I mean, most people lose a parent. Many people don't have two parents. I mean, so reframing it that way, but it definitely, like I said before, I did some benefit finding, really great thing to do in positive psychology. And one of the benefits is that, Dad, I'm sorry you're gone, but, I did learn that this is not a dress rehearsal. Mm-hmm. So that's the kind of, I think post-traumatic growth, like the way we sense making is just so important. So I'm glad you brought that up.
In post-traumatic growth, I love that, some of the areas that result from post-traumatic growth, which you just mentioned, is a greater appreciation for life, changed set of priorities, warmer, more intimate relationships with others. I think we realize that, holy shit, this is all about relationships.
Yep.
I think we touched on Chris Peterson when we first spoke, or was that Rob Mack? I don't know.
No, it's okay. We can talk about Chris Peterson.
I'm getting my positive psych people mixed up.
No worries.
But it's interesting, you were telling your story, and thank you for sharing that. And it made me think. I was talking with Rob Mack, and I don't know if you know him. I think he went to the MAP program also, might have been different, not really a different era, but a different time. And it's interesting how I love your line of pain is a touchstone for growth. I think that's absolutely spot on, because everyone who shares a story on here is kind of like, yeah, I had the knife to my wrist, like that, and it's not all suicide, but that was Rob's story. Had the knife to my wrist. And then I was like, well, what happens if I wait 15 minutes? And so I think we all get to that point of pain, of wanting the pain to stop, of asking, what's this all about? And I guess the better answers we can come up with means the more enjoyable life becomes. And positive psychology for me was like manna from heaven.
Yep.
I mean, it was massive.
Just while I have it, I'm just thinking about something. I have it. I'm off screen here for a second, but I'm grabbing a book. This is a great book by Margarita Tarragona, who's a psychologist.
Oh yeah, she's
yeah. So she works with Positive Acorn, which is Robert Biswas Diener, Ed Diener's son, also a great psychologist in his own right.
Yep.
It's called Positive Identity.
Indiana Jones of positive psychology.
Yes, the Indiana Jones is what Marty called him. Yeah. Great guy, and great researcher, and he works a lot on coaching now. But this Positive Identities book, so it's one way to say, well, how do I do that? Like, how do I try to change my narrative? How do I try to change my stories? And this book by Margarita Tarragona is great because there's exercises you can do, and she's a terrific psychologist. So it's really all, very, very much based on the research, but a really good workbook to kind of think about, well, how do I work on my story?
Well, and one of the pieces of work that I loved by Robert was when he went to the slums of Calcutta.
Yeah.
And did work with families there in extreme poverty, and found that, you don't necessarily need material wealth to be happy. That, right. I remember one of the stories was a guy that was like for lack of a better term, like a rickshaw driver. He would pull like a cart around and give people rides in the city. And the house that he lived in had 3 walls and a roof. And a family of 6 lived in this one room, 3-walled lean-to. And he was grateful for the opportunity to have work. He was grateful for running water, which I think was the river next to them. There was no toilet. And yet he found things to be grateful for in that, which I think is a great, it offers great perspective to us to remind us all that we have to be grateful for.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, a couple thoughts on that is, I think in that work, and he also, worked with the Maasai and actually joined a band of Maasai. And I have seen a picture, because I've seen Robert speak a few times, of him like having to, like they tattooed him with a knife basically, and he's like had to be stoic. Yeah, I mean, it was like, or no, it was circumcision, I think. They didn't show, thank goodness they didn't show the cut. Right, sorry, dude. Didn't want to make you
I was going to spit my coffee on my laptop.
I know. But my point is that he found that there are some similarities, that well-being can be found cross-culturally. Yeah. And also just relationships. I mean, relationships are so important. And so often, and Chris Peterson says it in one of his books, Primer and Positive Psychology, that's really kind of if you had to say what's one thing, it's relationships. So, I mean, I'm very much a person who's equity and justice. It's important to, I mean, I don't want anyone to not have a toilet or not have running water. Right. So those are real needs that have to be met. So, I mean, because the reason I say this is sometimes I worry is like, well, everyone can be happy, even if you're destitute. I think no one should be destitute. Right. And people are destitute, right? That's the way it is. And people are at different places, and everyone can use positive psychology regardless of where they are. So,
right. Well, yeah. And Chris's tagline was "Other people matter." And
yes, exactly.
I remember reading about that. I don't know, 2004, 2005, something like that. Mm-hmm. And I was a little bit frustrated by it, honestly, because I'm more introverted. I can be a little bit reserved. I had a little anxiety back then, had a little depressive streak back then. Well, maybe still do, but, and it's like, I was in my mind at first, I was like, like now I got to go out and like be nice to people and like talk to people. And, I'm kind of joking about that, but only half. Mm-hmm.
Right.
And the funny thing is that once I made that shift, it's a whole new world, because I think, kind of going on the ideas of Jared Clifton and those primal world beliefs, I think that it shifts what you believe about the world writ large, like to what extent do you see the world as safe versus dangerous? But then there's that other level of, what are your general beliefs about people? Are people generally good or generally bad? Are they honest or dishonest? Will they help me or not? Or what extent, to what extent? And I think the more positive interaction, meaningless at some level, positive interactions, those 2 or 3 minute conversations that we have at Safeway or Starbucks or wherever you are, but just the attempt to connect and get the other person to smile.
Right.
You walk away a winner, they walk away a winner, because you both get that positive emotional boost.
Absolutely. And what that reminds me of is high quality connections. Looking at Jane Dutton's, one of her books over here, but I can't find it. But yeah, high quality connections. Chris Peterson was at the University of Michigan, and that's where Jane Dutton is. And just what in her work, a lot of her work is about taking a moment, even if it isn't a good friend or a family member, and just taking a moment just to kind of savor that interaction. And I think, I don't think my parents didn't, meant any harm, but I think in their generation, it's just about very kind of like being polite, not imposing, and that was like good behavior, right? But a lot of this research is, taking a little bit of a moment, having a conversation with a person from whom you buy, a newspaper, if anyone still buys those things, or, a candy bar or coffee. Those things can be tiny little boosts.
Oh yeah.
So I totally agree with you.
Well, and there was the study back in the 70s, I think, with Alice Eisen at UCLA, and she found that just finding a quarter in a payphone. To the young listeners out there, a payphone was something. It was a phone in the middle of the street that you would go to, and you would put coins in, and then you would dial a number, and then you would talk on a phone, kind of like a cell phone but stationary. So finding a quarter in the change slot of a payphone was a small positive emotional boost, as well as receiving 3 Hershey's Kisses wrapped up in tissue paper. But like huge benefits from 3 Hershey's Kisses, like more accurate decision-making, positive emotional boost, you get along better with your coworkers. Like X-ray technicians actually diagnosed their X-rays slightly more accurately.
Right.
So I love that, because it reframed what I needed to get a positive emotional boost, and it brought it down to a really small scale.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I totally agree. So I'm right now, I'm in Annandale, Virginia, which is near DC. And my office, I have this beautiful view. My neighbors, her roses are blooming, but just taking that moment, just to savor that moment, because we're talking a little bit like about primal world beliefs. And I know you've had Jer on before, the most basic beliefs about the world, or you can just think about kind of the beliefs you have. Just look out and what in the world can give you like a little bit of a boost, and just having, and actually going back to my coaching from my mentors in sobriety, is one metaphor they would use is, my mentor would say, you have the telescope backwards. So you're looking in the big end and everything seems tiny. And so here, turn it around. And that was really helpful, that the world is actually, the problem is like how I'm perceiving the world, as opposed to the world itself. And that there's so many good things in the world. There are bad things in the world too. And those are actually things I spend a lot of time on, in my life. But every day I spend time looking at the good stuff, savoring. And the last thing I'll say on that is I do a five item gratitude list, and I send it to one of my sober buddies every day. And it's ritual. Yeah, and actually, and it helps me, like, oh, I didn't put my wife down here. I think we need to go out on a date. Or, my daughter and I, oh yeah, we should just hang out and get some coffee and, just shoot the shit for a while. Because sometimes I'm forgetting the things that are great in my life. So I think that's super important. These little doses, whether it's a Hershey's Kiss or something that someone's done for you, or relationships or gratitude.
Well, and so do me a favor. Sorry to interrupt. There's like six things I wanted to say while you were talking.
Sure.
Explain savoring a bit to people that aren't familiar with that idea, because I think it's really, really important.
Sure. So I think, if you savor something, we all know what the word means, right? If you savor it, it just means you kind of relish dewy. Yeah.
But
especially in this age, this damn phone of mine.
I'm busy, Henry. I've got to go.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Right. So, relishing something. And I think often we think about it as like the perfect dessert, right? You're relishing it. By the way, savoring is a real challenge for me. I force myself to meditate in part because I just move too fast. There's lots of benefits, but that's one of it. So the first part of savoring is this is a good thing. So recognizing that something is a good thing and that's worthy of savoring. And then stopping, really getting mindful, right? And so getting mindful about it, like, and getting into the sensations. So how does it taste? How does it feel? What does it look like? Really getting mindful and trying to do that in a way you might meditate, and just let the sensations come in, and then feel the sensations. And it's a practice. It's like everything else. It's a habit. I'm much better about gratitude than I am about savoring. But just taking that moment to enjoy something that's enjoyable can have once again one of those little boosts. And of course, if you make it a habit, it's a big boost.
Yeah, thank you for that explanation. I think you're absolutely spot on. The awareness is the first piece, and then sitting with it for a few seconds. I mean, literally the other day, I stopped to smell the roses. Like I walked past a rose bush and I was like, wait a second. And I just went back and smelled it.
Right.
And I think if we realize that these positive emotional boosts, I think I was looking for big things when I was younger, like graduating school or getting a new job or, I don't know, paycheck or a new car, whatever it was. But those things don't come along frequently enough. Mm-hmm. And so if we dial down our expectations to look for the minute, kind of like that idea of turning the telescope around, right. I think that is really, really helpful.
I think too, another piece of that is that those things are contingent, right? So you have to do something to get. I think part of cultivating a gratitude is like, there is a ton of stuff that's free, right? And if you're of a religious bent, it could be called grace, right? So that rose, you didn't have to pay to enjoy it, right? Mm-hmm. This beautiful day, the blue sky. It's funny, when I was a kid, I hated the sound of little kids. I have 3 girls next door. Yeah, I'm a teacher too. This is terrible. The sound of the kids next door just makes me happy.
Yeah, it does.
And I'm just so if they're just doing their thing, I just sit there on my back porch and I love this. And so having that mindset, like there's so much out there to enjoy. Now, I don't want to be, just a small caveat is like there are people who are in terrible circumstances. So I'm not saying, hey, just see the good stuff in your life and you'll be fine. Let's just say that there's a lot of bad things out there and people are living in terrible places and don't have enough. And to the degree that you can, look for the things that are free. Everyone has relationships, right? And try to savor them a little bit.
And to me, it's always an interesting challenge to look for and spot these things. And what you alluded on one of the physiological effects, I guess, from these things. And what I notice is that when I get in touch with these, I'll exhale more deeply.
Yes.
And the exhalation is connected to the parasympathetic nervous system, which is the relaxation response, and the vagus nerve, which automatically kicks in that relaxation response. And it was funny. I remember I started dating my fiance 6 years ago. And I said to her, do you realize that every time I touch you, you exhale?
Wonderful.
And she was like, oh my God. Like I wasn't even aware.
Marry that woman.
Oh yeah. Well,
clearly,
now,
I mean, right. But clearly like you make her happy, right? I mean, what a great response she has that.
Yeah.
You're calming to her.
Yeah. So changing subjects, because we haven't even gotten any of the questions yet that we prearranged. Right. But I do want to get to, because I want to get a little bit more to gratitude and then to optimism.
Sure.
But any tips on gratitude? You said you were doing daily 5 points. Do you vary that at all? Is there different things you look for?
Right. Because I mean, as you know, some of the literature, I know Lee Bomersky and some others know about maybe 12 years ago. I forget when that came out, but
still trying to figure out how to say her name properly.
Yeah. Sonia Bomersky. Yeah. Sonia. There you go.
Sonia L.
Sonia L. She and a couple other folks on the study basically said that, it's good to vary it. Sometimes doing it every day isn't good. Mm-hmm. So I think just finding your own rhythm. The problem I have with trying to do it 3 days a week is I stopped doing it.
Right.
Because I found what works for me is a habit. And also, I just think that doing it with someone else. So I also, again, just kind of in the habit literature, the habit, best practices is if you can do a habit with someone else, it's much more likely to stick. Accountability partner, even if it's implicit, right? That this is just something that Jay and I do every day is send each other a gratitude list. So variety is really important. And so, but I do get the same things like that was a great meal and my kids were great today when we were running around outside. And sometimes, so that's really important is variety. Also, I think it's really important. So my sister's birthday was yesterday and we've had a little bit of a rocky patch lately, which is unusual. This is the sister I've traditionally been closest to. And we just, it's part of it is mom's 89. And, for those of you who have aging parents, that's just I'm getting sad just thinking about it, right? It's just a heartbreak. And getting a little sad here, but that's okay. But just what I put on my list is I want to write her basically a gratitude letter because this is the sister who, when, the house was kind of falling apart, she was the one that really was kind of like mom and dad to me. And we argued because you know how it is if you argue with your parents. But especially when I was, drug use and alcohol, she was kind of keeping an eye on me. And then, for a while when I was really unhappy, she was the only family member that I really felt safe with. So, just doing something like that. So I think, again, through habit, you get an awareness like, you know what, this is a really good time so I'm going to write her a gratitude letter. Especially, part of it is that I value the relationship, but we've gone through a rough patch. And we're on the other side of it, but it's still, we're not talking as much as we used to. And just to really, to help me, because, the thing that's top of mind for me is this disagreement we had for about a year about mom and her care and things like that. And really to bring to top of mind is the good stuff from our relationship. So I do think once you start making gratitude kind of a working muscle, it's easier to kind of build on that.
Well, yeah. And thank you for sharing that. And when I look at gratitude, I try and look at different layers. So because I think most of us look for the obvious, I'm grateful for my mom, my dad, my wife, the house, that kind of thing, the clothes, my job, which is all great. And then the next layer is sort of look for things that are less obvious. Like I'm grateful for my hearing, for example, just because I have a friend who is dealing with, I think it's Rainier's syndrome and is progressively losing his hearing and is going to go profoundly deaf shortly. And he's my age. He's in his mid-50s. Or the ability to feed myself with a fork, because not everyone has that. Right. And then the third level for me is being grateful for your biggest challenges in life. Like, yes. I'm grateful for my contentious divorce because it taught me to really master these emotional management tools.
Yes.
That kind of thing. And which is kind of a post-traumatic growth flavor to it.
There, it reminds me of someone who's not in the psychological literature, but a woman named Paula Waymiller, writer, who she was kind of on the speaker circuit in the Mid-Atlantic, and basically what she said is your most challenging students is a guardian angel, right? That the kid that this kid is driving me nuts, like I can't get through to them. That person is the gateway to the most growth I can possibly do.
Yeah.
So I think what you talked about having gratitude for things that are tough. That's a tough one, right? A lot of people are like, no, I'm not going to go there. But actually making it into something where this has really helped me. I've had to up my game. I've had to change, because I think, some of my most challenging students over the years have changed me the most. Cause it's like,
yeah,
I have more flexibility. I'm the adult. I'm trained. They're doing what they're doing.
You have a fully functioning prefrontal cortex.
Exactly. They're not. Yeah. And some would argue that some people never get there.
I wasn't going to say that.
I won't do a gender thing on there because I'd be beating up on myself. But yeah, I love that you have that you're able to frame it as like, this sucks. It doesn't feel good. And it's bringing out the best in me.
Yeah. It's there for a reason.
Yeah.
So what's the reason? I have but to find it. So yeah, thank you for that.
Make you better. And then make you better, John.
Yeah. Yeah. And so here's a shameless plug for your book, Daily Better, 365 Days of Optimism.
Yeah, here it is.
There it is. So like, what was your thinking in writing that book? Why was that important to you?
It's important. I mean, I remember when I was a kid seeing this show. It's probably in the 80s. I mean, a long time ago. And it was like a half-hour program. It was not the regular programming, but the presenter said, we're worried about this. We're worried about this. The biggest problem is poverty. And I'm like, yeah, you don't hear about poverty being the biggest problem. You hear about the Cold War. You hear about the oil crisis. You hear about, tax cuts. You hear about things like that. I'm going, that's what we were worried about in the 80s. But basically that because of how we get the news, the worst thing rises to the top, right? If it bleeds, it leads.
Mm-hmm.
So if the news reflects the state of the world, and the world is screwed, right? Because it's about war, it's about murder, it's about celebrities doing ridiculous things that are kind of fun to watch, but also pretty awful. All the worst things, right?
Yeah.
So, I like and more recently, Steven Pinker's books like Enlightenment Now and The Better Angels of Our Nature influenced me in that he has a great quote. So if you don't want to cherry pick, meaning like, because I think I see the news as cherry picking the worst,
mm-hmm.
then count all the cherries.
Mm-hmm.
And when you look at the whole world, you see that, despite what's happening in Ukraine, one reason why Ukraine is so outrageous is that we've stopped doing this in Europe, right? You don't roll tanks over borders anymore. And, the reaction against clearly what Putin is doing is awful. It's one of the worst things that's happened in decades, at least in Europe. I mean, these things have also happened in other places and we pay less attention to it, which I think is a problem. But the world response to, the fact that Finland and Sweden are going to join NATO, and they should, because their neighbor is being awful, right? That's a
mm-hmm.
a good response to what Putin is doing. So anyway, there's so much. So there's so much. There's less war. Crime is near historic lows, although it has been going up. There's more inequality, but across the world, fewer people are in abject poverty. I read a lot of positive news sites, and what I'm hearing is that India is getting closer to eliminating like the $2.05 a day absolute poverty. We were talking about Calcutta earlier, and someone. So there are so many things going right. How do we seed our kind of news feed with the things that are going right? And so my idea is to do basically a daily reflections. So every day of the year, I want to tell a story about what's right with humanity. And so for today's March 19th or May 19th, today's Johns Hopkins birthday. And Johns Hopkins, of course, became rich, mostly through investments in the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad. And that's, where I live. It's a big thing. And most people have heard of Johns Hopkins, but it's in Baltimore. It's one of the great medical schools in the world. Yeah. Great university too. And, things like, Johns Hopkins, from this behest by this person, we have things like, we have great medical universities, and actually the medical residency started there. Different forms of disinfection of surgery theaters, doctor training. So, one thing it's easy to forget is like, I'm getting a CT scan for some bad headaches that I have. You get older, these things happen more. And I'm also getting physical therapy for a sports injury. These things didn't exist. I mean, we're talking leechcraft, we're talking, medicine. So how can we think about something that humans have done right every day of the year? And that's really, it reflects my own story. In the introduction, I talk about how, this attitude of gratitude that I was taught totally changed how I felt about myself and how I felt about the world. So that's really why I did it.
And again, thank you for sharing that. And I think that attitude of gratitude, while the saying is trite and little wincy, it's absolutely true at the same time, because I think the more we practice things like optimism or gratitude, the more you become an optimistic or grateful person in the moment.
Yes.
And so you begin to train your mind to spot these things. And over time, those skills become a habit and they infiltrate your way of thinking and perceiving. And you start to pick up on this stuff with very little, if no effort.
Right.
As you move through your daily life, which is amazing.
Yes.
So let's go with me, if you would, into Marty Seligman's work on realistic optimism and his explanatory styles for people that are interested in becoming more optimistic, besides, purchasing your book and reading these stories, which is awesome. How do we interpret things to our benefit? Or even what's the trade-off between choosing to be more pessimistic, quote, realistic, or being more realistically optimistic?
Yeah. And Marty's work is on explanatory style, something he calls learned optimism, is really about yourself. It's not about the world. So that's an important distinction to make between what I'm trying to do and what his work does. And that's just really, how do you interpret? Oh yeah. I mean, it's harder. Actually, what Jer is doing is more about, connects to our beliefs about the world, as opposed to our beliefs about our own life. So optimism in psychology is just the belief that the future is going to be good, right? And pessimism is a belief that the future is going to be bad.
Or the present moment. I mean, I can also have a pessimistic interpretation of right now, or an optimistic interpretation.
Yep, exactly. So, and he breaks from his research, he's broken it into three things that let's say let's say I'm single. I call a woman, we've been on a few dates. She stops calling me. So here's how I might interpret it pessimistically is that, I knew this was going to happen. I'm a schmuck. This is just like the rest of my life, and it's always going to be this way. And so you could break that into, personal, right? It's about me. Pervasive, it's about all parts of my life. And permanent, it's always going to be this way, right? If I were more optimistically, it's like, well, she's missing out because, I'm not, I thought we had some great dates, and if maybe we're not right for each other, so that's okay. So it's literally just an interpretation, and it's not personalizing it, right? I'm not saying I'm the problem. I'm not making this a part of who I am. It's not my identity is not tied up. So often, and I think I certainly relate to this, and I think most people do, is this idea that if I have a failure, it's basically a report card on me as a human being, right? So what this explanatory style can help you do is to not personalize it. I mean, it's really coming out of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is really Marty's background. Aaron Beck, one of the founders of kind of the cognitive CBT, is one of the founders, along with Albert Ellis, of that whole way of doing therapy. But just really, taking your own judgments and then applying some rationality to it in order to argue against them. So what, the upshot is basically to think of the good things as permanent, pervasive, and personal, and the bad things as not. The problem with that, I think, is, there's some ethical issues, right? So a narcissistic person can do all this, right?
I knew you were going to go to narcissists.
Yep, I was going to go. But the fact is that, like, think of it as a tool, not as an ethical decision. And there should always be the eject button about ethics. So if I say, if I do something wrong or unethical, I shouldn't say, well, it's not my fault, it's not personal, it's not pervasive, it's not permanent. So I mean, I do think there's the ethical piece, but just the practical piece about well-being, I think, is really helpful. That we, especially my men's group work, so many guys just are, if they don't get a call back from someone they're trying to date, I mean, it's a statement about their whole self.
Well, and that's funny. Like, I've been doing a lot of work on depersonalization skills with my clients over the past few years, and just teaching them how not to take things personally, like dating, right? And I remember back when I was like 25, I was consulting with a teacher in a school, and I was young and she was more experienced, and I think she was kind of like, "Who the hell are you to tell me anything?" And so she was a little bit snarky one day, and it kind of hurt my feelings. And I went back to my favorite professor at Cal, Meiji Singh, and I was like, "Hey, this is what happened, and I'm kind of struggling with it." And he said, "John, we humans make the mistake of taking 95% of what other people say, do, and feel personally, right, when in fact it's about 5%. And I was like, and I've been working on that ever since.
Yep.
And so how can we learn to interpret other people's behaviors or what they feel in a way that has nothing to do with us?
Right.
And the example I give is, like, the boss comes into work, he's really angry. You can tell, like, his grip on his suit or his briefcase is tight, his brow is furrowed, his walk is fast, goes into the office, slams the door. Everyone on the floor is thinking, "Oh shit, what did I do to piss him off?"
Right.
They're taking it personally.
Very human.
And like, "Oh my God, he hates the report that I gave him," or "He knows I left 5 minutes early yesterday," or whatever it is. When in fact, there's 600 other explanations that are probably far more likely, like, just got in a fight with his wife, has a teenage son that came home drunk last night, got a ticket on the way to work, had a flat tire on the way to work, is worried about finances for the company or his own finances. I mean, and right, you can go on and on and on. But the emotional gift that you get from taking it less personally is massive.
Absolutely. So I'm teaching a positive psychology class right now to high schoolers, and we just talked about self-compassion on Monday. And I don't know if the Kristen Neff's work.
Yeah, she was a classmate of mine at Cal.
Yeah, because I know she went to Cal. I know she got her PhD there. But her this idea of self-compassion, like, is the three elements are: be kind to yourself, right? And if that's hard, because it is hard for a lot of people, think of how you would want your child to be treated. Think about how you'd want your spouse or significant other, girlfriend, boyfriend, they friend, be treated, or how would you treat a friend? And often doing the flip of, "Oh, I wouldn't talk to a friend the way I talk to myself." Right? Light bulb. And another piece that you touched on is this common humanity, that everyone is that boss. Everyone is that boss, right? And I know, if I'm mad about something, often it's about, three scenes back, right? Or you and I were talking about kind of, perseverating about different things and losing sleep over it earlier. And, that is the human condition.
It's going to happen.
So, when that happens, like, oh, it's because I'm a human, right? I'm suffering right now. because I'm human. And then what we've talked about before is having mindfulness. Oh, I'm really saying some nasty things to myself right now. That's, not judging yourself, because then you're just going to start beating yourself up. You shouldn't do that. But just to say, okay, this is a moment. How can I soothe myself? How can I comfort myself? Because clearly I'm not doing any good to myself. So I think that self-compassion relates to all this.
Yeah. And I love that you brought that up. That idea of shared suffering or common humanity from Neff is a big deal in my mind, in the sense that I think I used to beat myself up tremendously for like, oh, I'm depressed. I'm a guy. I shouldn't feel depressed. Stop being a pussy, all that stuff. And the common humanity or shared suffering piece says that when you get into one of those negative emotional states, be aware, because I think those uncomfortable emotions want to make us believe that our suffering is somehow unique and more intense and more special than anyone else. And it disconnects us from everyone because it's unique. I'm the only one that's ever suffered like this through a breakup, that kind of thing. Right. And I think that that's not true at all, that if you can flip it and realize, wait, hundreds of millions of people have been through breakups just like this. And maybe they're not exactly the same, but they've definitely suffered the exact same emotions as a result of a breakup. Therefore, these emotions actually connect us to millions and millions of other people. They're not isolating us. That's a big reframe.
Absolutely. Such a good one. Yeah, I think, there's the saying, don't compare your insides to other people's outsides.
Yeah. That's a fundamental attribution error, right? I like the...
Yeah.
It's much more palatable the way you said it.
Yeah, not original, but someone, a wise person told me that. And just this idea that person looks like they have their shit together. In fact, I probably look like I have my shit together, and I may not.
You do.
Thank you. But all of us are like struggling, right, with something.
Yeah, at times.
Right? And at times. So just that, you almost think about like, oh, everyone looks like they're fine, but I bet you someone in here has a shitty marriage, or is breaking up with someone, or has a kid that is tough, not because they're bad kids, but because they have a condition, or they're depressed. That's everybody. But you don't see that, right? Because of our presentation, social presentation. We don't wear our hearts on our sleeves all the time. So just that people struggle, the common humanity, it links us.
So this has been an amazing conversation. I'm aware of time. I've greatly enjoyed this. And can I ask you one more question? Because I think this is it was important to me. I don't know if it's going to be important to them, but so a while back I had Dan Tomasulo on, who has written a book on learned hopefulness, and love him, love his work. And he taught me really about the change to Marty Seligman's seminal work decades ago on learned helplessness that he started with dogs. Right. But he recently updated and revised that work, realizing that it wasn't learned helplessness at all. Can you give us that story?
Sure. So this was Marty's work when he was, I think this is the work that he did either for his PhD at Penn or just after. And he was working with another psychologist named Steve Mayer, who I think is at one of the Colorado, I forget if it's Colorado State or University of Colorado, but Steve Mayer is now a neuroscientist. He went on to get PhDs in other fields, including neuroscience. But basically, the way they thought about it in I guess it was the late 60s or early 70s, was that they would give shocks to dogs, and they would create circumstances basically that if the dogs believed they couldn't escape, they just gave up. They didn't even try, even though escape was possible, and they were shock these animals, which is terrible. Then 50 years later, doing neuroscience work, and this is not work that Marty did; it was work that Steve Mayer was doing. And basically, now that they can, I think they used fiber optic light to stimulate different nerves. And basically, what they found is that it was the default was helplessness, right? And that you had to learn to be agentic, which makes a lot of sense, right?
Okay, wait. No one's going to understand agentic.
Oh, yeah. So that leaping out of a box is, you have to learn how to do that.
So you have to learn how to help yourself.
You learn how to help yourself.
Okay.
Right. And so, and I love Dan Tomasula's work is great. And it's his book is Learned Hopefulness, and definitely recommend that for people. This makes sense from evolution, because you think about really basic life forms. What's their basic defense?
Sometimes I think I'm a basic life form.
Well, I wasn't going to mention it, but hopefully we could talk after the Zoom. John, I agree.
I felt like a blob this morning.
Yeah. And so you were like plain dead. That was your first defense, right?
Yep.
It's the freeze, flight, or fight, right? Those are our basic defenses. And so what we have to do is we have to teach people agency. The one thing I like about that is that I think there's not enough compassion for people who are struggling. I think we're getting better about it, but for so much of history, it was like, get off your ass, don't be lazy,
suck it up.
Getting off your ass, that first step, is hard. And as a depressive, that's where I was. And the reason I got off my ass is my ass fell off when my dad died, which happens for a lot of us. We all, you go through divorce, someone dies, you get fired. Luckily I chose, I'm like, help, right? I said help, and then I got help.
Good for
and
you.
Then they taught me. Yeah, they taught me. So I'm incredibly lucky. And so, I dream of a world where everyone has access to help, because I don't think everyone is taught agency. And I think that's a huge social problem, a huge problem with our society.
Well, and I think thank you for the explanation. And I think that's why this shift in idea is such a big one, in the sense of, to the extent we can realize that helplessness is our initial state.
Exactly.
And that we have to learn ways to get past it or beyond it. I think it can change the narrative of what you were saying, like, you're so lazy. Like, it's interesting, in my advanced age, I've noticed that I jump on people and I'm like, let's be careful with that word lazy. Like, I'm not really a fan of that word lazy. Yes, something's going on. I do not think it's laziness.
Right. I agree.
It's so pejorative. And, maybe it's ADHD, maybe it's depression, maybe it's they don't know any better. Maybe it's, that they're anxious. Maybe it's trauma. There's all these other possible explanations that could be going on. I think it's a cop out to just say, oh man, my son's so lazy.
Right.
So I'm always kind of cautioning people against the word lazy.
Agreed. I just don't use it as an educator.
Yeah. So what do you use? Do you throw erasers at your students?
Sometimes, but they know that it's in good fun. I don't do it out of anger.
Do you get to hit their hands with a stick, like in Pink Floyd The Wall?
Actually, though, I do little pats sometimes, at least for the bad. I do it to myself too when I'm bad.
Yeah, I do that too. Bad, John.
Bad. So I just there's something blocking it, and not that necessarily that the goal I've created for them is one that they should attain. Although I try to, and luckily I work in a school where there's a lot of freedom, and things are project based, inquiry based, not standards based. Not that standards are all bad, or it's not test based, and just to get curious, like what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's, I think part of it is being a parent, and part of it is teaching a long time, is just realizing that everyone's got a story, and the kind of the course of learning that I think a student should take, everybody's got a different course. And yes, there's assignments and standards, but just being more curious, listening more, and intrinsic motivation. Is there anything in here that you want for yourself? And, most students do. Most people, I think everyone wants to succeed in certain ways. And that can be just really a challenging thing for a lot of people.
Well, yeah. And success for some people might be surviving the day.
Yes.
That in my early 20s, I was kind of shocked to realize that, like, oh, your parents don't value education and you're focused on survival. Okay. Right. I get it now. If you're worried about getting jumped on the way home from school, learning's probably not going to be at the top of your list.
Nope.
Back to the fight, flight, freeze idea.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's what they're coping with.
Yeah. Well, Henry, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this. I've loved this conversation.
Yeah.
Just in wrapping up, can you tell people where they can get your book and what the next book is to look forward to?
Sure. So you can get it on Amazon. It's The Daily Better, 365 Reasons for Optimism, Authors Place Press, and Amazon. So love for you to check that out. I think it's a lot of fun. Gotten a lot of great feedback about it as kind of a mood booster and kind of a shifter of how people see the world. And the next book, not sure when it's going to come out, but hopefully in the next year or two. And that's Positive Psychology for Teens, and that's really based on my work as wellbeing director at my school, and just different frameworks, but also in a lot of specific exercises to help teens just improve their mood, find purpose, improve their relationships, and just feel success.
Well, please keep up the fantastic work. I appreciate it.
Yeah, John, great talking. And
again, I really appreciate the conversation.
You bet.
So for those of you listening out there, please feel free to rate, review, like, and share if you liked it. If you didn't like it, it's all right. You don't have to do a damn thing. Thanks so much for listening. This is the Evolved Caveman.
Thank you for listening to the Evolved Caveman podcast. If you like what you've heard, support us by subscribing, leaving reviews, and sharing the podcast with friends and colleagues. For the latest, most powerful tools to connect with like-minded men, join the Facebook group at The Evolved Caveman. Follow Dr. John on Instagram at The Evolved Caveman, all one word, or join the email list by visiting guidetoself.com.